I do want to move on to our first guest, and this is very much in keeping with a lot of what we're talking about, because we're going to go to Lebanon here, because Israel's war on Lebanon continues to intensify despite the so-called ceasefire. For those who haven't, been paying attention to the news out of there, Israel just issued orders for all of South Lebanon. That means they ordered the residents of 14% of the country to leave their homes or basically die. That includes over 300 villages. They demanded they flee north of the Rania River or risk being killed, which is, not even south of the Litani anymore. They've moved even more north than that. And since March 2nd, when this escalation began, Israel has killed more than 3,100 people in Lebanon. That includes around 700 people since the ceasefire supposedly went into effect on April 17th. That includes health workers and journalists, entire villages wiped out, tens of thousands of homes destroyed, more than 1 million people displaced. This is happening during a so-called ceasefire. It's such a joke to even use that term. And at the same time, we have Israeli officials openly discussing plans to permanently empty parts of South Lebanon and settle those areas with Israeli Jews eventually. And this is even as the Israeli and Lebanese military officials are set to meet at the Pentagon tomorrow for a fourth round of talks. And again, this is unfolding alongside negotiations, which I just mentioned. But it's important to note that this is also happening amidst negotiations between the U.S. and Iran that increasingly appear tied to Lebanon's future. The Iranians insisting that Lebanon must be included in any broader regional settlement. And of course, Israel and its allies furious at the idea of losing their freedom to continue bombing Lebanon. And then inside Lebanon, you have factions aligned with Washington who are once again being accused of treating Israeli military pressure as a way to basically weaken their political opponents inside Lebanon after failing to defeat them politically, meaning Hezbollah. So to discuss all of this, we're joined by Hussein Assaf, journalist with Vpol based in Lebanon. Hussein, welcome back to Breakthrough News Live.
Thank you for having me on.
Well, there's so much to get into here, Hussein, but I want to start with a recent report by Al Akhbar that said that Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam and President Joseph Aoun are working behind the scenes to keep Lebanon out of a potential U.S.-Iran settlement, essentially so they can continue their direct negotiations with the Israelis and then deny Hezbollah and, by extension, Iran the political credibility of securing a ceasefire for Lebanon. And, this really echoes, as you know, what happened in 2006 when anti-resistance political elites inside Lebanon privately were urging the U.S. to delay a ceasefire so that Israel could deal a quote-unquote bigger blow to Hezbollah. So what do you make of this reporting, and how is it being received inside Lebanon?
While there's I haven't seen many reports on that, but all indications suggest that this is true. The performance of the government, primarily the prime minister and the president, has been toward that since they took offices in early 2025. And I would just want to remind something that in 2024, after the ceasefire, the Israeli occupation forces during the entire war were not able to advance in southern Lebanon. All their advancement and all the demolitions that we saw in the past 15 or 16 months happened following the ceasefire, which the prime minister and the president, to an extent, pushed to. Because, as you know, the ceasefire that was supposedly mediated by the United States also made the Israelis commit to withdrawing from Lebanon to end the land, air, and sea aggressions, which none of that happened. So what's happening today, especially when it comes to direct talks with the Israelis, that is being pushed by the U.S., by the Lebanese president, and secondary to him, the prime minister, is just a completion of that same path, of that same direction. The Israelis and the United States today see that this is a golden opportunity to end the resistance in Lebanon and to create Lebanon into another settlement that is fully subjugated to the Israeli occupation and to the United States, especially following the ongoing genocide in Gaza, really. And after failing to achieve their war objectives so far in Iran, both Israel and the United States are trying to come out as some sort of victory on one of the fronts. And here it's very important to say that both the Lebanese president and the prime minister are irrelevant to the situation that's happening now. They are merely proxies acting uh, on behalf of the United States and in complicity or alignment, at least, with the Israeli objective. However, everything they're doing, we can't say that they are doing without full knowledge, or without any kind of will, because after all, they are violating the Lebanese constitution, which labels the Israelis our enemy. They are pushing for civil war in Lebanon by alienating a large percentage of its population. They are, to an extent, enabling the Israeli war crimes in Lebanon by choosing uh, to continue down the path of meeting with Israelis without enforcing any kind of precondition to these meetings related to ending the war in Lebanon. So, all in all, everything that's happening is a continuation of the 2024 war on Lebanon, which also is continued by the Prime Minister and the Lebanese President.
Well, Hussein, it's interesting that you say that the US and Israel are sort of scrounging around to try to get a victory on one of the fronts. And at the same time that Israel has been able to inflict enormous destruction on Lebanon, and we just, read through those numbers of the death toll, which is, really horrific, 700 since the supposed ceasefire. But at the same time, Israel has not achieved its core objective, which it has stated on numerous occasions, which is to defeat or disarm Hezbollah. And recently, reporting emerged that Hezbollah also perhaps injured the commander of the Israeli unit that was implicated in the killing of Hind Rajab when they were in operations in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah seems to be capable of sophisticated operations and targeting of senior Israeli personnel. Again, despite a lot of destruction, demolition of homes, etc. How do you assess Israel's military performance in Lebanon, and what role are newer tactics, especially the FPV drones and other technologies, playing on the battlefield? Does this challenge Israel's claim that it now has achieved deterrence in Lebanon with regards to Hezbollah?
This is usual in asymmetric warfare, especially when you're talking about resistance. This can be measured by the amount of damage and destruction. After all, Israel is an entity that is openly supported by the United States, by the West, by NATO, when it comes to open supplies of weaponry, open supplies of intelligence, and a political umbrella which enables them to do everything. So, in that sense, the amount of destruction can be easily done when you have an air force such as Israelis. The amount of explosives that they have, whether on the level of demolition when they go into towns, or airstrikes. So in that sense, if you go back to between the 1982 and the 2000 liberation of southern Lebanon, which was achieved by the resistance, Israelis had the upper hand. The resistance was composed of hundreds of men in southern Lebanon that decided that this is not acceptable to live under occupation, and they wanted a sovereign country. And so they started employing guerrilla warfare tactics with weaponry very much less than we are seeing today with the resistance. And they eventually achieved the 2000 liberation by going into attrition war against Israelis, by raising their costs, by on the army and on the political class, and when it comes to the Israeli public. So the amount of destruction here, while is extremely painful, but resistance was always a choice, and everyone knew the sacrifices that should be made, whether on the level of Hezbollah as fighters or the level of the support base, which is one of the largest in Lebanon in terms of voter base. That's one. Two, I think that what resistance is doing today is practically just authentic guerrilla warfare. They are choosing their targets to inflict maximum damage when it comes to on the psychological level or the command level or even the military costs, as we saw the Merkavas and other. Secondly, they are using it widely because today the resistance is dealing with the war that it might not stop soon. So they are using the resources very wisely whenever they don't need to defend a town ferociously. They would retreat and let Israelis into ambushes to raise the cost on them without suffering from a large number of martyrs or destruction of capabilities. So what we're seeing today is normal. The question is how long Israelis are able to sustain these losses or sustain these the number of casualties on the military level, and when it comes to the Israeli political class, given the issues with the Knesset today and the subject of dissolvement and the upcoming elections in November, which could be also in September as early elections. So these questions are today the main issue in Israel. Israeli media reported just today that uh, the Hezbollah's operations in Lebanon are inflicting very high level of cost on the Israeli army. Of course, there's two aspects for the increasing Israeli reports about the losses. One is we can assume that it's the Israeli military and intelligence trying to force the political class into giving them more freedom of operations, if you might say, without restrictions to bomb areas, especially in Beirut. However, the political class is seeing this as there's a fine line between what they're trying to do and what Washington is approving, because as you know, there's the negotiations today with Iran. So while Hezbollah is extremely successful, Israelis are also advancing on the ground, and this is not something that anyone can hide. But the question is, how costly would it be, and how much they are able to sustain it?
And with that, Hussein, I wanna go back to the sort of things happening inside Lebanon, because we've seen Secretary of State of the U.S. Marco Rubio say that the U.S. wants to train and arm special units inside the Lebanese army to confront and attack Hezbollah. And then we also saw recent news with the Americans now sanctioning Lebanese individuals that include even Lebanese army officials they're accusing of being too close to Hezbollah. There's also been this campaign by people in the US and some inside Lebanon too to pressure the Lebanese government to remove army leadership figures who have resisted so far, dragging the country into an internal conflict and using the army to do basically Israel's dirty work to fight and try to disarm Hezbollah. So I'm curious, how dangerous is this American effort to basically try to transform parts of the Lebanese army into a force aimed at confronting Hezbollah internally? And how serious is the risk of the U.S. pushing Lebanon towards internal conflict?
It's very important what you mentioned right now, and I want to expand a bit before, as some kind of small introduction before going into it. The Lebanese architecture, or the Lebanese political architecture today, is very unsimilar to what we're used to. You have a president that has no party behind him, who has no support base. We have a prime minister who also has no party and no support base. And as you know, Rania, one of the prerequisites of any president or prime minister is their support base and the amount of support base, and they're usually some kind of national consensus between different parties in Lebanon. But today the situation is different. I think if you go back to the statements made by Tom Barak in the past year and Lindsey Graham on what they view as the mission of the Lebanese army, which is to confront Hezbollah rather than protect the state from the Israeli aggression or any kind of other threats, you can also see that there is a change in the mindset of the United States when it comes to the de facto architecture that has been that convention in the past few decades, especially since following the civil war in Lebanon. So what's essentially happening today between the Israeli forced displacement order, pushing the Shias, or who are mostly the resistance support base in Lebanon, toward areas that are not, there's no political alignment between them. And when you see how much the United States is trying to push for the Lebanese army unit, which the Lebanese commander has been trying to avoid since he reached his position. He was trying to create a margin where he could act he would implement the orders of the political class without pushing the country into civil war. So this conventional era of Lebanon is being changed right now. And I think many people yesterday saw the forced displacement order that was issued to Sur or Tyre. You could notice that there's a small part of the city that was not part of the forced displacement order, which is very interesting. This part of the city is known to be as a Christian area. The Christians, it's dominantly Christian, and they have, of course, they're part of Sur, but there they have their churches. They have, it goes hundreds of years back of between the architecture and the norms and the culture, etc. And they've lived side by side with all the Sur community and the population, which is very diverse. However, you see, as what they're doing in the border villages, where they're trying to say that we are sidelining the Christian areas, and what our aim is the Shia community. They're trying to create this alienation between the Lebanese public among different sects, which obviously we know how the Israelis treat Christians. We can see it, and we saw it even in southern Lebanon when they desecrated Lady Mary's statue. They bombed the churches. I've seen it in Gaza. We've seen it in the occupied Al Quds. So this is part of the failed propaganda. However, inside Lebanon, with many of the U.S. aligned political parties, this could be a trigger into an internal conflict. I don't want to call it a civil war yet, because the most powerful party in Lebanon when it comes to organization structure and weapons is the resistance. So far, despite them trying to push for a civil war, I don't think that the decision to go into civil war would be actually, the US would be able to push others into it, because that would be suicide. Um, but of course, this does not stop the US from trying to cause any kind of internal conflict that might result in the spilling of the blood among the Lebanese citizens themselves.
Yeah, and of course there are people, Lebanese people, who are often in the U.S. People like Edwin Sahnawi, who I wanted to ask you about, but we're a bit out of time here, so we'll have to leave it for next time. But who are, of course, playing a role internally in the country to try to push that sort of sectarian propaganda that you're talking about. It's quite dangerous and damaging stuff. But we will have to leave it here for this time around. Hussein, thank you so much for joining us. I encourage everybody to go check out Vpol on Instagram. You guys do excellent segments and just constant updates and reportings on what's going on in Lebanon. And hopefully we can get you back on soon. Stay safe out there.
Thank you. Thank you.